"You don't belong in first class." Those words hit me like a slap across the face. But 30 minutes later, the woman who tore up my boarding pass was walking off that plane with her termination papers in hand. My name is Marcus Washington, and this is the story of how one flight attendant's prejudice cost her everything, and how I learned that sometimes justice comes not from anger, but from having the power to change the system itself. If you're ready to hear a story about standing up to discrimination without throwing a single punch, then hit that subscribe button for Black Stories Box, where we expose injustice one story at a time. And let me know in the comments what state you're watching from, because this happened right here in America, where we're supposed to be better than this. Chapter 1. The morning of the 15th of March started like any other business trip. I was heading from Atlanta to Seattle for a board meeting, nothing unusual there. What I didn't expect was to become the center of a viral video that would cost 3 people their jobs and force an entire airline to change its policies. I dressed casually that day, black t-shirt, comfortable jeans, and my favorite running shoes. I've learned over the years that comfort matters more than appearance when you're stuck in a metal tube for 5 hours. My boarding pass clearly showed seat 2 Ampere first class, which I'd purchased with my own money. Not that I should have to justify that to anyone. Walking through the jet bridge, I noticed the usual bustle of travelers, flight attendants preparing the cabin, and that familiar airplane smell of recycled air and cleaning products. The first-class cabin was pristine, those wide leather seats that cost a fortune but make long flights bearable. I found my seat and started to settle in when I heard her voice behind me. "Excuse me, sir." The tone wasn't friendly. It was the kind of voice that already assumed I was in the wrong place. I turned to see a blonde flight attendant in her mid-30s name tag, reading Sarah Mitchell. Her eyes scanned me from head to toe with the kind of look I'd unfortunately grown familiar with over the years. The look that said I didn't belong here. "You're in the wrong cabin," she said, not even glancing at my boarding pass. "Coach is toward the back." I pulled out my phone and showed her the mobile boarding pass. "Actually, this is my seat, 2 Ampere. Sarah barely looked at the screen. That could be printed from anywhere. These fake boarding passes are getting really sophisticated these days. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Around us, other passengers were settling into their seats, some glancing our way. I felt that familiar tightness in my chest. The same feeling I'd had as a kid when teachers assumed I was the troublemaker, when store clerks followed me around when people crossed the street rather than walk past me. But I wasn't that powerless kid anymore. "Ma'am," I said calmly, "I'd be happy to have this scanned at the gate if there's any confusion." That's when her colleague appeared, a younger guy with sandy hair and a smirk that told me everything I needed to know. His name tag read Kevin Ross. "Problem here?" Sarah Kevin asked, eyeing me like I was shoplifting. "Fake boarding pass," she replied, without hesitation. "Probably printed at home. You know how they try to sneak into first class. That one word carried decades of assumptions, stereotypes, and prejudice." Kevin nodded knowingly. "Yeah, we've been getting a lot of that lately. Security really needs to crack down." I watched in disbelief as Sarah took my boarding pass and, without any attempt to verify it, tore it cleanly in half. The sound of paper ripping seemed to echo through the cabin. "There," she said, dropping the pieces at my feet. "Now you can get a real boarding pass from the gate agent for your actual seat." My heart was pounding, but I kept my voice steady. "You just destroyed my valid boarding pass without scanning it or checking with anyone." "Sir, I'm going to need you to gather your belongings and move to the back of the plane," Kevin said, gesturing toward Coach. "We have paying customers who need these seats." That's when something inside me shifted. Not anger. I'd learned long ago that anger only gives people an excuse to call security. This was something colder, more calculated. This was the feeling of someone who had spent 20 years building power precisely for moments like this. As they were talking, I noticed a young woman in a flight attendant uniform watching from the galley. She looked new, probably fresh out of training. Her name tag said Maya Chen, and she had the wide-eyed look of someone seeing something that didn't feel right. What Sarah and Kevin didn't know, what they couldn't have known from looking at me in my casual clothes, was that I wasn't just another passenger. I was Marcus Washington, CEO of Aerotech Industries, and more importantly, I owned 23.7% of the stock in Continental Airways, the parent company of the airline they worked for. I pulled out my phone and opened a group text to the board of directors. "Emergency shareholder meeting. Documenting discrimination incident on Flight 847. Will need immediate intervention." The response was immediate. Board member Jennifer Liu replied within seconds, recording. In progress, I typed back. Sarah was still explaining to nearby passengers why they'd removed the disruptive passenger when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Continental Airways Executive Office. Chapter 2, Mr. Washington. The voice on the phone belonged to David Park, Continental's Chief Operating Officer. We received your message. Can you confirm your location? I put the phone on speaker, making sure my voice carried clearly through the first-class cabin. I'm currently on Flight 847 where your crew just destroyed my valid boarding pass and accused me of fraud because they decided I don't look like I belong in first class. Sarah's face went pale. Kevin stopped mid-conversation with another passenger. Sir David's voice was tight, with what I could only assume was panic. Can you please put Flight Attendant Mitchell on the phone? Sarah approached reluctantly, her confident demeanor cracking like ice on a warm day. This is Sarah Mitchell. Miss Mitchell, this is David Park, your COO. Can you explain why you destroyed a passenger's boarding pass without scanning it? Well, it looks suspicious. These fake passes are becoming a real problem and... Did you scan the pass to verify it? No, but did you check his ID against the passenger manifest? Not exactly, but the way he was dressed, Miss Mitchell. David's voice cut through her explanation. You are speaking to Marcus Washington, CEO of Aerotech Industries and one of our largest shareholders. He is also, as of this moment, documenting what appears to be a clear case of racial profiling by our crew. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched Sarah's face cycle through confusion, recognition, and finally pure terror. Kevin, who had been standing behind her looking smug, suddenly found something very interesting to study on his shoes. Furthermore, David continued, I'm looking at our passenger manifest right now, and Mr. Washington's ticket was purchased 3 weeks ago through our corporate account. There is absolutely no question about its validity. Maya, the young flight attendant, stepped forward from where she'd been observing. Sir, I took some pictures of the torn boarding pass with my phone. I thought something wasn't right. Sarah spun around to face Maya. You took pictures. You had no authority to. Actually, I interjected. She had every authority. And Maya, thank you. I'd like copies of those photos. Maya nodded, her hands shaking slightly as she forwarded the images to my phone. David's voice came through the speaker again. Mr. Washington, on behalf of Continental Airways, I want to apologize for this unacceptable treatment. We are initiating an immediate investigation, and I'm personally flying to Seattle to meet with you. That won't be necessary, David. But I do want to see how this company handles discrimination when it happens to someone who can't fight back. I looked around the cabin. Other passengers were openly staring now, some recording with their phones. A businessman in seat 1 Ampere was typing furiously on his laptop, probably already posting about this on social media. Miss Mitchell, I said, my voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent years in boardrooms, I'm curious about your training. What does Continental's anti-discrimination policy say about treating passengers differently based on their appearance? Sarah's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. We have training on that. But this wasn't about race, it was about security. Security, I interrupted. You made a security decision based on my clothing and skin color without following a single security protocol. You didn't scan my pass, check my ID, or consult the manifest. What security training teaches you to tear up documents before verifying them? Kevin stepped forward, trying to salvage the situation. Sir, maybe we can resolve this quietly. I'm sure we can find you another first-class seat. Another seat. The words came out sharper than I intended. You want to give me another seat in the cabin I already had a ticket for after your colleague accused me of fraud and destroyed my property. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a slight delay due to an administrative issue. We'll be boarding shortly. I knew that administrative issue was a phone call David was having with the captain right now. Maya approached hesitantly. Mr. Washington, sir, is there anything I can do to help? I looked at this young woman who'd had the courage to document what she saw was wrong, even when it might have meant trouble with her colleagues. Maya, how long have you been flying? This is actually my 3rd week on the job, sir, and in those 3 weeks have you seen other situations like this? She glanced nervously at Sarah and Kevin. Maybe I shouldn't say. Maya, I said gently, you're not going to get in trouble for telling the truth. In fact, your job is probably the safest one on this plane right now. She took a deep breath. There was an incident last week, an older black gentleman with a cane. Sarah said his upgrade looked suspicious and made him go back to coach. But she never scanned his ticket either. The words hung in the air like an indictment. This wasn't an isolated incident. This was a pattern. Chapter 3. My phone buzzed with a text from David Park. Captain has been briefed. Crew changes being arranged. How do you want to proceed? I looked up at Sarah and Kevin, who were whispering frantically near the galley. Other passengers were clearly listening to every word of our conversation, and I could see phones recording from multiple angles. Here's what's going to happen, I announced loud enough for the entire first-class cabin to hear. I'm going to show everyone exactly how discrimination gets handled when the victim has the power to do something about it. A well-dressed woman in seat 3B lowered her magazine. Are you really a shareholder? 23.7%, I confirmed, which means I have significant say in how this airline operates and who represents our company. I turned back to Sarah. Miss Mitchell, you made several assumptions about me based on my appearance. You destroyed my property without following any verification procedures. And based on Maya's testimony, this appears to be a pattern of behavior. Do you have anything to say for yourself? Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. I was just trying to protect the cabin for paying customers. Paying customers, I repeated. I paid for this seat. But you decided I couldn't possibly be a legitimate paying customer because of how I look. Do you see the problem with that logic? The businessman in 1 Ampere spoke up. I've been watching this whole thing. She never even looked at your boarding pass properly before she tore it up. That's not security, that's profiling. Kevin tried one more time to defuse the situation. Look, maybe we all got off on the wrong foot here. Why don't we just number... My voice cut through his attempt at damage control. We're not going to sweep this under the rug. We're going to address it head-on right here, right now. My phone rang again. This time it was board member Jennifer Liu. Marcus, I've been monitoring the situation. Are you recording this? Multiple passengers are recording. Maya has photos of the destroyed boarding pass. And I have witnesses to the crew's statements about fake boarding passes and their assumptions about who belongs in first class. Good. The board is convening an emergency meeting in 30 minutes. We need documentation of everything that happened. I looked at Maya. Are you willing to provide a statement about what you witnessed? She nodded firmly. Yes, sir. What happened wasn't right. That's when Sarah finally broke. Please, Mr. Washington. I have 3 kids at home. I can't lose this job. I made a mistake, but I wasn't trying to be racist. I was just doing what I thought was best for the airline. What you thought was best, I repeated slowly, was to assume a black man in casual clothes couldn't possibly afford a first-class ticket. That's not. I didn't. She struggled to find words that would somehow make this better. Sarah, I said, and for the first time my voice carried a note of sadness rather than anger. I grew up in Detroit. My father worked 2 jobs to pay for my education. My mother cleaned offices at night so we could afford school supplies. I know what it's like to be judged by how I look instead of who I am. The cabin was absolutely silent now. When I was 12, a teacher accused me of cheating on a test because she couldn't believe a kid from my neighborhood could score that high. When I was 16, store security followed me around because they assumed I was stealing. When I was 25, a police officer pulled me over in my own neighborhood because I was driving a car he decided was too nice for someone who looked like me. I paused, letting those words sink in. I built my company and bought these shares not just to make money, but to have the power to change systems that allow this kind of treatment to continue. Today you became part of a teaching moment, not just for you, but for everyone watching. Sarah was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. The sad part, I continued, is that if I had been anyone else, if I had been just another black passenger without power or influence, you would have gotten away with this. How many other people have you treated this way who couldn't fight back? Chapter 4. David Park's voice came through the phone speaker again. Mr. Washington, I have Captain Rodriguez and Chief Flight Attendant Susan Martinez on the line with me. They're prepared to address this situation immediately. Put them through, I said. A new voice joined the call. Older, with the authority of someone who'd been flying for decades. Mr. Washington, this is Captain Rodriguez. I want to personally apologize for what happened in my cabin. This behavior is completely unacceptable and doesn't represent the values of our airline. Captain, I replied, I appreciate the apology, but I'm more interested in what actions you're going to take. Chief Flight Attendant Martinez spoke next. Sir, based on the witness statements and documentation, we're implementing immediate disciplinary action. Miss Mitchell and Mr. Ross are being removed from duty pending a full investigation. Sarah's head snapped up. Removed from duty. You can't do that. I have rights. The union, Miss Mitchell Martinez's voice was ice cold. You violated multiple company policies regarding passenger treatment, destroyed passenger property, and engaged in what appears to be discriminatory behavior. The union will represent you during the investigation, but you will not be serving passengers while this matter is pending. Kevin, who had been silent for several minutes, finally spoke up. This is ridiculous. We were just doing our jobs. If anything, we were being extra careful about security. Extra careful, I interrupted, by not scanning a boarding pass, by not checking ID, by not consulting the passenger manifest. Explain to me how destroying documents without verification enhances security. The businessman in 1 Ampere laughed bitterly. I've been flying for 30 years, and I've never seen crew destroy a boarding pass without scanning it first. This wasn't security. This was prejudice, plain and simple. Captain Rodriguez came back on the line. Mr. Washington, we have replacement crew en route. They'll be here in 15 minutes. With your permission, I'd like to personally escort the current crew off the aircraft. That's acceptable, I said, but I want Maya to remain. She showed integrity by documenting what she saw, and she deserves recognition for doing the right thing. Maya's eyes widened. Thank you, sir. As if on cue, 2 airline supervisors appeared at the aircraft door. They moved efficiently, speaking in low tones with Sarah and Kevin. I watched as both flight attendants were escorted off the plane, their faces showing a mixture of shock, anger, and resignation. The passengers in first class buzzed with conversation. The woman in 3B leaned over. I can't believe I just witnessed that. Are they really fired? Suspended pending investigation, I clarified. But based on what we've documented here and Maya's testimony about previous incidents, I doubt they'll be back. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer Lou. Board meeting concluded. Unanimous vote to implement immediate policy changes. PR team is preparing statement. Legal is reviewing potential civil rights violations. Well done. I typed back, this isn't about revenge. It's about making sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. That's when I noticed the young man in seat 4 Ampere had his laptop open and was typing furiously. He looked up and caught my eye. I'm a reporter for the Seattle Times, he said. I've been documenting this entire interaction. Would you be willing to give me a statement before I could answer? Maya stepped forward. Sir, I want to say something if that's okay. I nodded for her to continue. I've only been doing this job for 3 weeks, but I love it. I love helping people and making their flights comfortable. What happened today, that's not what this job is supposed to be about. She looked directly at the reporter. Mr. Washington was polite and patient, even when he was being treated terribly. He could have caused a scene, could have demanded immediate satisfaction, but instead, he used this as a teaching moment for all of us. The reporter was scribbling notes as fast as he could write. And I want people to know, Maya continued, that not everyone in this industry thinks the way Sarah and Kevin do. Some of us actually care about treating all passengers with dignity and respect. I found myself smiling for the first time since boarding the plane. Maya, how would you like a promotion? Her mouth fell open. Sir, we need more people like you in leadership positions. People who will speak up when they see something wrong, even when it's difficult. The new crew members were boarding now. An older black woman, as the lead flight attendant, and a young Hispanic man as her assistant. They moved with professional efficiency, quickly preparing the cabin for departure. The lead flight attendant approached me. Mr. Washington, I'm Patricia Williams. I'll be serving your cabin today. Is there anything specific I can do to ensure your comfort after what you've experienced? Just treat every passenger the way you'd want to be treated, I replied. That's all any of us really want. Chapter 5. As the plane pushed back from the gate, I found myself reflecting on the morning's events. The confrontation was over, but the real work was just beginning. My phone was buzzing constantly with messages from board members, executives, and now media outlets who had gotten wind of the story. The reporter from the Seattle Times, who introduced himself as Jake Morrison, had moved to the empty seat next to me with permission from the crew. Mr. Washington, can you help me understand something? You could have identified yourself immediately as a shareholder. Why didn't you? I thought about that question for a moment. Because every day, Black Americans face discrimination when they don't have the power to fight back. If I had pulled the "Do you know who I am" card right away, it would have sent the message that this treatment is only wrong when it happens to someone important. Jake nodded, still taking notes. But ultimately, your position did make the difference. Unfortunately, yes. And that's the problem with systemic discrimination. It relies on victims being powerless. The solution isn't to give every victim power, it's to change the system so that power isn't required for basic dignity. The businessman from 1 Ampere who had introduced himself as Robert Chen joined our conversation. I have to ask, what made you stay so calm? I would have lost my mind if someone tore up my boarding pass. I smiled sadly. 30 years of practice. I learned early that if a black man raises his voice, he becomes the problem instead of the victim. The moment I showed anger, the story would have become about my reaction rather than their discrimination. That's exhausting, Maya said from where she was organizing the galley. Having to manage everyone else's comfort while you're being mistreated, it is, I agreed. But it's also strategic. By staying calm and letting them reveal their prejudices on their own, I gave them enough rope to hang themselves. My phone rang again. This time it was Dr. Angela Davis, a civil rights attorney and family friend. Marcus, I've been following this story online. It's already going viral. There are videos from multiple passengers circulating on social media. I looked around the cabin and sure enough, several passengers were still on their phones, probably posting their own accounts of what they'd witnessed. Angela, I want to make sure we handle this responsibly. This isn't about destroying 2 people's lives, it's about changing a culture that made this possible. I understand that, but you also can't let this slide. What happened to you happens to countless other people who don't have your resources. Sometimes making an example is the only way to create change. Jake Morrison looked up from his notes. Mr. Washington, how do you respond to people who might say you're using your wealth and power to ruin the lives of working-class employees? It was a fair question, and one I'd been grappling with myself. Here's what I would say to that, I began. Sarah and Kevin made choices based on prejudice. They assumed I was lying, cheating, and didn't belong in first class because of how I looked. Those assumptions led them to destroy my property and humiliate me in front of other passengers. I paused, choosing my words carefully. If I had been a white man in the same clothes with the same boarding pass, would they have torn it up without scanning it? If I had been an elderly white woman, would they have assumed fraud? The answer is no, and we all know it. Patricia Williams, the new lead flight attendant, approached with a tablet. Mr. Washington, I hate to interrupt, but we've received a message from corporate. They want to know if you'd be willing to participate in a company-wide training video about this incident. Only if the focus is on prevention rather than punishment, I replied. The goal should be teaching people to recognize their own biases, not just punishing them after the fact. My phone buzzed with a text from my daughter, who was a sophomore at Howard University. Dad, you're trending on Twitter. Number justice at 30000 feet. I'm proud of you for standing up, but also for staying classy. That message meant more to me than all the corporate apologies combined. Jake Morrison had one more question. What do you want people to take away from this story? I thought about my father, who had worked 2 jobs and still faced discrimination at both. I thought about my mother, who cleaned offices and was often treated as invisible. I thought about every black professional who had been questioned about whether they really belonged in first class in the boardroom in positions of authority. I want people to understand that discrimination doesn't just hurt the victim, it hurts everyone. When you judge people by their appearance instead of their character, you miss out on everything they have to offer. Sarah and Kevin made assumptions that cost them their jobs, hurt their airline's reputation, and created this entire mess. I looked around the cabin at the diverse group of passengers who had witnessed this exchange. But I also want people to know that change is possible. We're not stuck with systems that perpetuate discrimination. We can do better, and we will do better. Chapter 6. The flight to Seattle was surprisingly peaceful after all the drama at the gate. Patricia Williams and her crew provided exceptional service, treating every passenger with the kind of professionalism that should be standard but often isn't. As we began our descent, my phone lit up with a call from Continental Airways CEO Michael Thompson. I'd met him several times at board meetings, but we'd never had a one-on-one conversation. Marcus, I've been in meetings all morning about what happened on your flight. I want you to know that we're taking this extremely seriously. I'm glad to hear that, Michael. What specific steps are you planning? First, immediate retraining for all cabin crew on anti-discrimination policies. Second, we're implementing a new reporting system so employees like Maya can document incidents without fear of retaliation. Third, we're creating an oversight committee that includes community representatives to review all discrimination complaints. It was a good start, but I wanted to push further. Michael, what about accountability for supervisors? Sarah and Kevin didn't learn these behaviors in a vacuum. Someone trained them, someone supervised them, and someone created a culture where this kind of profiling was acceptable. There was a pause on the line. You're right. We're conducting a full review of management at that base. If we find evidence of systemic issues, there will be consequences up the chain of command. Jake Morrison, who had been listening to my side of the conversation, gestured to ask if he could include this in his article. I nodded. As we landed in Seattle, I realized that this story was far from over. What had started as a personal confrontation was becoming a catalyst for industry-wide change. Patricia Williams approached as passengers were deplaning. Mr. Washington, I wanted to thank you for how you handled this situation. I've been flying for 22 years, and I've seen too many incidents like this get swept under the rug. Patricia, can I ask you something? In your experience, is this kind of profiling common? She looked around to make sure other passengers weren't listening, then nodded sadly. More common than it should be. Not just racial profiling, but discrimination based on age, disability, accent, clothing. Anything that makes someone seem different from what some crew members think a first-class passenger should look like. Maya approached as well. Mr. Washington, I've been thinking about what you said earlier. How do I know if I'm being offered a promotion because of merit or because of publicity? It was a smart question from a young woman who was clearly thinking several steps ahead. Maya, you spoke up when you saw something wrong even though it could have cost you your job. You documented evidence when others were destroying it. You put integrity before self-preservation. Those aren't publicity stunts. Those are leadership qualities. As I walked through the Seattle airport, I noticed several people pointing and whispering. Word of the incident had clearly spread beyond just social media. My phone rang as I reached the baggage claim. It was Dr. Davis again. Marcus, I've been contacted by 3 other passengers who say they've experienced similar discrimination on various airlines. They want to know if you'd be willing to help them seek justice. I thought about that 12-year-old boy who was accused of cheating the teenager, followed by security the young man pulled over for driving while black. How many of those incidents could have been prevented if someone with power had stood up earlier, set up meetings with them, I said. But Angela, I don't want this to become about me. This is about creating systems that protect everyone, not just those who can fight back. Jake Morrison appeared beside me at baggage claim. Mr. Washington, I've been checking with my sources at other airlines. This appears to be a wider industry problem. Would you be interested in a follow-up story about systemic discrimination in air travel? Only if you focus on solutions rather than just problems, I replied. Exposing discrimination is important, but creating change is more important. My luggage appeared on the carousel, a simple black suitcase that looked exactly like dozens of others. Nothing about it screamed wealth or importance. Just like nothing about my appearance that morning had suggested I was anything other than a regular passenger who deserved basic dignity and respect. As I headed toward the exit, my phone buzzed with one final message from Jennifer Lou Board meeting tomorrow to formalize new policies. Your experience today is going to change how this industry operates. Thank you for turning a painful moment into a powerful teaching opportunity. But the message that meant the most came from my daughter, Dad. My friends and I have been following this story all day. You showed us that you can fight injustice without becoming the villain. That's the kind of man I'm proud to call my father. Walking out into the Seattle afternoon, I realized that this morning's confrontation had been about more than just a torn boarding pass or 2 flight attendants losing their jobs. It had been about the power of documentation, the importance of allies like Maya, and the responsibility that comes with privilege. Chapter 7. 6 months later, I'm sitting in my office looking at a report that would have seemed impossible last March. Discrimination complaints across the airline industry are down 34%. More importantly, the reporting of incidents is up 67%, which means people feel safer speaking up when they witness unfair treatment. Continental Airways implemented every change they promised and then some. They created the Maya Chen Integrity Award, given monthly to employees who demonstrate moral courage in difficult situations. The training program we developed has been adopted by 4 other major airlines. Sarah Mitchell completed a comprehensive bias training program and wrote a public apology that was thoughtful and genuine. She was eventually rehired by a different airline after demonstrating real growth and understanding. Kevin Ross was not so fortunate. Investigators found evidence of multiple previous incidents, and he was permanently banned from working in the airline industry. Maya Chen was promoted to crew supervisor and is now leading training sessions for new flight attendants. She speaks to groups about the importance of speaking up when you see something wrong, even when it's scary. But the change I'm most proud of isn't in corporate policies or training programs. It's in the hundreds of messages I've received from people who say the story inspired them to stand up to discrimination in their own lives. A hotel manager in Dallas implemented new procedures after seeing how documentation made the difference in my case. A restaurant owner in Chicago retrained her staff on treating all customers with equal respect. A teenager in Atlanta spoke up when he saw a classmate being bullied and later said my story gave him the courage to act. The reporter Jake Morrison won a journalism award for his coverage of discrimination in the travel industry. His follow-up articles led to congressional hearings and new federal guidelines for training airline personnel. Dr. Davis and I established a foundation that provides legal support for discrimination victims who can't afford representation. We've handled 63 cases so far, with a success rate that's making other industries take notice. The most unexpected development came 3 months after the incident. I received a letter from a young black pilot named David Johnson. He wrote that he had been considering leaving aviation because of the discrimination he faced, but seeing how the industry responded to my case gave him hope that change was possible. Today, David is flying for Continental Airways as part of their expanded diversity recruitment program. But perhaps the most meaningful outcome is something smaller and more personal. Last week, I was on another flight, this time dressed in a business suit for a board meeting. The flight attendant, a young white woman, approached an elderly black gentleman in first class who was wearing overalls and a work shirt. I tensed, ready to intervene if necessary. Instead, she smiled warmly and said, "Good afternoon, sir. Can I get you anything to drink before we take off?" No questions about his ticket, no assumptions about whether he belonged there, just professional courtesy and respect. That's when I knew the real victory wasn't in the policies or procedures or training programs. It was in that moment when basic human dignity became the default instead of the exception. I still think about that morning in March sometimes. I think about the choice I made to stay calm instead of getting angry, to seek justice instead of revenge, to build systems instead of just punishing individuals. I think about the 12-year-old boy who was accused of cheating and how different his story might have been if there had been systems in place to protect him. I think about all the passengers before me who faced the same discrimination but didn't have the power to fight back. And I think about my daughter who told me recently that she's considering law school because she wants to continue the work we started. The most important lesson from all of this isn't about airlines or discrimination or even justice. It's about the power we all have to create change even in moments when we feel powerless. Sometimes justice comes not from anger but from having the patience to document the truth. Sometimes change comes not from destroying your enemies, but from giving them the opportunity to become better. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stay calm, speak clearly, and trust that the truth will be enough. So let me ask you, have you ever witnessed discrimination and stayed silent? Have you ever been the victim of prejudice and felt powerless to respond? Or maybe you've been in a position where you could have made a difference, but weren't sure how. The comments section is yours. Tell me your story, and let's continue this conversation. Because every story matters, every voice counts, and every moment of courage makes the next one a little easier. And if this story resonated with you, hit that subscribe button for Black Stories Box. We're building a community where injustice gets exposed, truth gets documented, and change happens one story at a time. Because in the end, that's how progress works. Not through grand gestures or perfect heroes, but through ordinary people choosing to do the right thing even when it's hard. The plane has landed, but the journey toward justice continues. And we're all in this flight together.